But I wanted to get more to this narrative of Ohio State separation in the Big Ten and then the national picture of the SEC and what's going on there, because I ran the numbers for the first 3 rounds and it was SEC 40, Big Ten 17, Big 12 12, Pac 12 10. Got to keep the 12s and the 10s straight. And then the ACC with 8. That was through the first 3 rounds. And then the Big Ten had a lot of players drafted there in rounds 4 through 7, made it a little bit more respectable in regards to final numbers at SEC 63, Big Ten 48. I don't remember the rest of them. They were in the 30s and 20s. But it does mean something, just like the recruiting on the other side. You know, this is kind of the measurement on the back half of the career 3 or 4 years later after we see the recruiting rankings where Ohio State has planted this flag right in the middle of all these SEC teams, and it doesn't seem to be affecting Ohio State. But as it goes with the rest of the Big Ten, it's not real good to hear and to see.
Yeah, those are some alarming numbers when you think about it. On one regard, how dominant the SEC has been. For the Big Ten, you know, certainly most of that's Ohio State, probably half of that. And, you know, for that ACC number, my goodness, that explains how bad that league has been, with the notable exception of Clemson. I would assume out of that 8, that 5 or 6 of those were Clemson. So, you know, I think again, you know, all politics is local, and all, you know, Ohio State fans really care about is Ohio State. They really don't care how good or how great the Big Ten as a whole or individually the other schools does. The point was made that, you know, most of Michigan's 10 came on days past the midway point of day 2 and on into day 3, whereas most of Ohio State's were done on day 1 and the first part of day 2. So it does kind of illustrate, I guess, you know, the widening that we've seen between all these programs. But I guess again, you know, those schools that had the higher draft picks, the guys from the first 3 rounds, you know, they were better in recruiting 3 and 4 years ago. So that, again, it shouldn't be that big of a shock that Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama dominated the early portions of the draft, and LSU certainly, with the team that they put on the field this past year, was nothing short of amazing. So, you know, that team, I think, that LSU had this year could match up with just about anybody, and it helped that the quarterback had arguably the greatest season any college football quarterback has ever had at that level. I mean, maybe somebody somewhere stockpiled big numbers against lesser competition like an Andre Ware or something goofy like that years ago. But at any rate, yeah, I hear the numbers, I see the numbers, I understand where they came from, and I think that you know, there's forces at work trying to reverse some of this, but it's going to be a slow change, I think, gradual change. And the teams that were in contention 5 years ago are still the teams that are in contention today, and will probably be the ones that are still in contention 5 years from now, just from an investment standpoint and a staffing standpoint. They have the best of everything, and that's why that gap just continues to widen.
Well, and I wrote years ago that when Urban Meyer came to Ohio State, he was going to bring the Big Ten kicking and screaming into, you know, the 21st century, and if they didn't come along with him, they were going to be left very far behind. And I think these numbers would be even worse without Urban Meyer at Ohio State, and he has raised the level of the Big Ten, and he's forced programs to spend on coaches. And that was the first step, is get coaches to come in and stay. And then you build up the facilities, and then you can start, you know, look at what Northwestern has, and all of these places have new facilities, but you're still trying to bring in kids from Florida and Georgia up to Chicago and into Indiana and, you know, Nebraska. And that's why Nebraska is like working on a pipeline with California kids, and you do what you can, but you're still going to be limited by your geography. I think you can take all the draft picks and plot them on a map, and from their hometowns, where they're from, and it will align with the SEC and stuff like that. It'll be as much territorial, because it does make it easier then for the SEC schools to recruit these players, because you recruit your footprint first, and the SEC's footprint is outstanding when it comes to talent. And I think that's a lot of it, other than the fact that the SEC is the best conference with the best talent. That's just what it is, and that's the draft picks show that. Now there are coaches who waste plenty of that talent, which we all know, and that happens out west as well. That happens in Texas, another very good state for high school football, where so much of the players that go to Texas and Texas A&M, like, why? What are you getting out of it? What have you done? What has it brought you other than an orange jersey, or the chance to play in front of people who yell well at Texas A&M and stuff like that? I think it's as much. I think geography will always help the SEC, and right now, the California schools are just they're screwing themselves by not taking advantage of the talent out there.
Yeah, considering those advantages, the SEC on the field beats the Big Ten more than the Big Ten beats the SEC, but it's not an embarrassing number. The Big Ten is the one conference that can stand up with the SEC and at least make it very competitive. I think it was 3-2 this past season, and that pretty much bears out year after year after year. I did see something, and I started to research all this. So when those numbers started to fall again this year, and it's a 14th consecutive year that the SEC's led the NFL draft in selections. But in terms of high school hometowns represented on NFL rosters, Florida was around 220. California and Texas were around 180 to 190. Then there was Georgia, and I don't remember the number. And then Ohio was next, around 80, 85. And then I can't, that was the last state I saw in the list. And I can't imagine that the Indianas and Illinois and Michigans, Pennsylvania, I would think would be close to being next. Mm-hmm. And is an interesting tidbit. 1 out of every 76,000 people in Louisiana turn out to be an NFL football player. The ratio in Louisiana is pretty crazy because the population's not high, but they've got the best ratio of NFL players, but not the sheer.
What if you're a defensive tackle? Like if you're just a random person from Louisiana who also happens to be a defensive tackle, you're probably like 1 in 600.
Yeah. There you go. But I think that's always a fascinating topic for me, looking at the SEC and the Big Ten, and that 40-17 split in the first 3 rounds, I think was stark. I would guess it's more like 35-25 most years. It's decided, but it's not crazy 40-17. And then to Steve's point, to see the ACC at 8, and I think Clemson at 5 of the 8. in the Big 12 over time is at the bottom. The ACC usually does pretty well. Mm-hmm. The Big 12 has really been hurting for anything outside of quarterbacks and wide receivers in that league of being elite players. What the thing that hit me in watching last night's game is, number one, I could do this at any time. I can pull this game up on YouTube, the 2016 game, and watch it on YouTube at any time. Why am I watching it? And the only reason I started to watch it was people were tweeting about it. And I was like, oh yeah, this thing's on. And I picked it up at some point in the first half. And Tony, you made a comment a few minutes ago about maybe Urban Meyer's only slight weakness was the passing game was hit or miss. Sometimes it looked great. JT Barrett against Penn State in the fourth quarter a couple of years ago in Columbus. Other times, and this was the prime example of it looked bad. It was painful to watch. And I used to think that was just a byproduct of those two schools being on the same field. It's always going to be a bloodbath, and it's always going to be 13-10, and that's just the way they play football. But we've seen much different in the last few years. But the one Barrett touchdown, he comes back to the sideline, and you see this shot of Joe Burrow for an extended period of time because he walked to meet him, kind of slapped him in the rear end, then turned around and he was pumping his fist. We got to see a good 10 or 12 seconds of Joe Burrow. And then to also consider Dwayne Haskins was on that team as well is just interesting in hindsight.
Well, Tom Moore, my cohort at the Ozone, we did a watch along of this game like 3 weeks ago. You know, the 40-minute YouTube version. And you're watching, you're like, holy cow, the passing game was so bad. Every throw is a 50-50 proposition. You know, even throws down the line, the guy would have to turn, backwards to catch it and lose all of his momentum. And then you compare it to what it has been the last couple of years. I mean, it's night and day, the advancement. And that's part of Ryan Day. I mean, he had 1 year with JT Barrett, but it's also part of, these are NFL quarterbacks now. And this is what this looks like compared to what they had with JT Barrett, who is an all-timer at Ohio State. But Ohio State doesn't have many all-time, many NFL quarterbacks, elite players at that position. And maybe Dwayne Haskins will be that, but he was elite at Ohio State. Justin Fields is an elite passer at Ohio State. Those two guys are way above where JT Barrett was, and I assume Joe Burrow would have been eventually as well. But that 2016 season, that game particularly, when you're trying to watch that, the passing game is just woof.
Yeah, it's everything that you described and discussed, and even worse. And the thing was, the wide receivers who became veterans, Paris Campbell, Terry McLaurin, they were so young at that time that they tried, they did the best they could. You had Noah Brown out there running around a little bit, and they made the comment, I heard in the third quarter, that at that point Curtis Samuel had only had one touch, and that'll tell you how good Michigan was at bottling him up and stopping him from getting involved. And he was like weapons 1, 2, and 3 for that offense that year. So Weber was doing the best he could, but there was nowhere to run. And the field position was really that's going to make it look even worse than it actually was when you're backed up to your own goal line for most of the game. But thankfully, Michigan helped them out, with a couple turnovers. I think a fumble at the 2-yard line, fumbled snap. It was a young guy, Devon Hamilton, got his hands in there on it. I think there was a pick in there somewhere. I don't recall who had it. Maybe Jerome Baker. I don't know. May have come out of there with an interception. They had one to somebody else that it bounced on the ground. Maybe Fuller, or not Fuller. All the names run together. But there was a ball. It looked like an interception. It was called an interception on the field, and they reversed it. It was just an amazing Ohio State-Michigan game. Every, like Tressel said, 1 yard counts like 2, that type of thing. Every inch you got was important, and none, of course, more than the 1 or 2 inches that JT Barrett got that first down by. A funny story, I was in the interview room when that happened because I needed to file a story as soon as the game went final, and they had internet in the interview room, and I didn't want to be stuck in all the traffic trying to get from the press box to the interview room. And they had 2 flat screens in the interview room. One of them was the house feed with a camera from the 50-yard line, and the other was the ESPN feed almost down the line from probably the 20 or the 25-yard line. And my first view is the one because it was the one that was live, was the stadium feed at that angle, and I'm like looking at his back, and I said to somebody in that room, he didn't get it. And then the other feed comes up on the other screen, and it looks like maybe his helmet and his jersey, maybe his hands crossed the 15-yard line, whatever it is. I said, that's going to be close, and they ruled that it was good, and then have the replay. And Harbaugh, one of many things he was upset about that day, but I'd say it was probably the right call. To me, the closest angles that they had down that line looked like that the football broke the plane of the 15-yard line before his knee hit the ground. I mean, it was close, but to me, that's what it seemed like. So, and there's a lot of traffic in the picture there, so it's hard to get a clean shot of it. But if that's what they called it on the field, it would have been hard to overturn. And somebody made the point that if they called him short on the field, I think that would have been a hard thing to overrule as well on the replay, short of video completely of him putting the ball across that yard line. So you know, what can you do? Games come down to inches, and that one did. And, Ohio State won the game. And, the sad thing about it, just like 2006, is, Ohio State didn't capitalize on the big win over Michigan that year. They went out and got blown out by Florida. Michigan, supposedly number 2, was hawking for a rematch. They got sent to the Rose Bowl and got dealt by USC. And, this time around, 2016, Ohio State, I joked on the thing last night on Twitter, when they had 7 points in the third quarter, it was on a defensive touchdown. It's like, how, I almost want to say, how in the hell, how in God's name does this team get shut out by Clemson? How did that happen? Kind of in mock disgust, but it was obvious if you were watching the game, they weren't very good offensively.
Good stuff each and every week from these two, and typically Kevin Noon. That's Tony Gerdeman in the middle from the ozone.net, Steve Hellwagon from Bucknuts on 247 Sports. And again, our thanks to Steve for posting these on Bucknuts, so you can get Steve's rundown as well as jump on there and obviously check out Ohio State football coverage on either one of those tremendous sites, the ozone.net and also Bucknuts. We talk Ohio State football here each and every week. We've done it 50 consecutive weeks, 5-0. If you've got any comments or questions that we did not get a chance to get to, please copy and paste them. You can leave them in the comments section of any of the videos. Join me on Sunday night at 10 o'clock for our call-in show and talk to me about anything concerning college football. And this is a very random note, and this is not being a good host because it should have been said 10 minutes ago, but I just got to say it. I think when we talked Big Ten, Ohio State separation, look at Clemson in the ACC, look at the SEC, I think actually Ohio State's in a perfect position based on the structure of the league and the levels, because the Big Ten still has great national credibility. It's still a respected football league. People still look at Penn State, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa to a lesser degree as a strong second tier, but Ohio State still has separation. So it's not the Clemson situation where people look at the ACC as a joke, and it's not the SEC where, oh my goodness, we've got 5 teams at the top 8 in the recruiting rankings that we got to battle with. Ohio State's created separation, but there's still great respect for that next tier.
Yeah, but eventually you got to beat Clemson.
Yeah, got to beat them at some point. And those two may run into each other a little bit more often here, as has already been the case since 2013 with 3 games in, 6 seasons or so. All right, Tony, thank you so much for stopping by and making this part of your work week. You as well, Steve. It's tremendous Ohio State talk here each time. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Thanks.
Stay
Have a good one.
See you next time.